It was a cold autumn night in the small town of Black Hollow, where nothing ever seemed to happen. The streets were quiet except for the occasional rustle of leaves swirling in the wind and the distant echo of a dog's bark. The moon hung low in the sky like a pale eye watching over the town, its light casting long, eerie shadows on the cobblestone streets. But beneath this peaceful facade, something dark was brewing, something that would shatter the fragile illusion of safety forever. Detective Clara Hayes stood at the edge of the forest, her breath visible in the frosty air. She pulled her coat tighter around her as she stared at the scene before her. A body lay sprawled on the ground, partially hidden by the thick underbrush. The victim was a young woman no older than 25, her lifeless eyes staring up at the starless sky. Her blonde hair fanned out around her head like a halo, but there was nothing angelic about the way she had been left discarded like trash in the woods. Clara crouched down next to the body, her sharp eyes scanning every detail. The victim's clothes were torn and muddy, suggesting a struggle. There were bruises on her wrists and neck, evidence of someone trying to restrain her. But what caught Clara's attention most was the strange symbol carved into the tree trunk just above the body. It looked like an ancient rune or perhaps some kind of sigil, its edges jagged and uneven, as if it had been done hastily with a knife. "What do you make of this?" Clara asked, turning to Officer Ben Miller, who stood a few feet away holding a flashlight. His face was pale, and he looked uneasy, as though he'd rather be anywhere else but here. "I don't know, ma'am," Ben replied, his voice trembling slightly. "Never seen anything like it before. Looks, unnatural." Unnatural. That was one way to describe it. Clara had seen plenty of crime scenes in her 10 years as a detective, but something about this felt different. There was a heaviness in the air, a sense of foreboding that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. This wasn't just a random act of violence. Whoever had done this had a purpose, and Clara intended to find out what it was. As the forensic team arrived and began processing the scene, Clara took a step back, letting them do their work. She walked over to the edge of the clearing where the trees loomed tall and ominous. The forest seemed alive with whispers, faint sounds that couldn't quite be heard, yet lingered on the edge of perception. Clara shook her head, dismissing the feeling as fatigue. She hadn't slept properly in days, not since the last case had kept her awake night after night. But deep down, she knew it wasn't just exhaustion gnawing at her. It was the weight of the job, the burden of knowing that every decision she made could mean the difference between justice and failure. And now, with another life cut short, she felt that weight pressing down harder than ever. Back at the station, Clara sat in her dimly lit office, poring over the case file. The victim had been identified as Emily Carter, a local college student known for her kindness and bright smile. According to her friends, Emily had been planning to move to the city after graduation to pursue a career in photography. Now those dreams would never come true. The autopsy report confirmed what Clara already suspected. Emily had died from strangulation, likely with a rope or cord, based on the marks around her neck. The bruises on her wrists suggested she had fought hard to escape, but whoever had attacked her was stronger and more determined. Clara leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples. Her mind raced with questions. Who would want to hurt someone like Emily? What did the symbol carved into the tree mean? And why had the killer chosen this particular spot in the forest? Just then there was a knock on her door. Clara looked up to see Detective Marcus Reed standing there, his tall frame filling the doorway. Marcus was her partner and closest friend, someone she trusted implicitly. He had a knack for seeing things others missed, and right now Clara needed all the help she could get. "Got a minute?" Marcus asked, stepping inside without waiting for an answer. "Always," Clara said, gesturing for him to sit. "What have you got?" Marcus placed a folder on her desk and opened it, revealing a series of grainy photographs. They showed various symbols similar to the one found at the crime scene, each one etched into different surfaces, trees, rocks, even old buildings scattered throughout the town. "These have been showing up around Black Hollow for months," Marcus explained. "At first we thought they were just graffiti kids messing around, but now we know better," Clara finished for him, her stomach tightening. "Do we have any leads on who's behind them?" Marcus hesitated before answering. "Not yet, but I did some digging and found something interesting. These symbols match designs used by an old cult that supposedly operated in this area decades ago. The Cult of the Whispering Shadows. Clara raised an eyebrow, intrigued, despite herself. A cult? Really? It gets weirder, Marcus continued. Legend has it they believed in communicating with spirits through these symbols. Some say they even performed human sacrifices to appease their so-called gods. Clara let out a low whistle. So you're telling me we might be dealing with some modern-day cultists? It's possible, Marcus admitted. Or maybe someone just using the lore to throw us off. Either way, we need to tread carefully. If word gets out, people will panic. Clara nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. Black Hollow was a tight-knit community where everyone knew everyone else's business. News of a potential cult operating in their midst would spread like wildfire, causing chaos and fear. We'll keep this between us for now, Clara decided. In the meantime, let's dig deeper into the cult's history. Maybe we can find a connection to our victim. As Marcus left the room, Clara turned her attention back to the case file. Something about this whole thing didn't sit right with her. The timing, the location, the symbol, it all felt too deliberate. Whoever was responsible wanted them to know something. But what? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of her phone ringing. She glanced at the caller ID and frowned. It was Sheriff Grayson, the man who ran the department and often clashed with Clara over her methods. Hayes, she answered cultically. Clara, we need to talk. Grayson's gruff voice came through the line. Meet me in my office as soon as possible. Clara sighed, knowing this couldn't be good. Whatever Grayson wanted, it probably meant trouble. Still, duty called and she grabbed her jacket before heading out the door. When she arrived at Grayson's office, she found him pacing back and forth, his face red with frustration. On his desk was a stack of papers which he shoved toward her as she entered. Care to explain this? He demanded, pointing to the top document. Clara picked it up and scanned the contents. It was a report detailing unusual activity in the forest, including sightings of strange lights and unexplained noises, all reported within the past week. Attached were witness statements describing encounters with shadowy figures moving among the trees. I was going to look into it tomorrow, Clara said calmly, though her pulse quickened. Why the rush? The mayor called me this morning, Grayson snapped. He's getting pressure from the townsfolk. People are scared, Clara, and they want answers. Fast. Clara bit back a retort, knowing arguing wouldn't solve anything. Instead, she nodded curtly. Understood. I'll prioritize it. Grayson gave her a hard look, then waved her away, clearly done with the conversation. As Clara left his office, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being pushed towards something bigger than they realized. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into place, but the picture they formed was far from clear. That night, as Clara drove home, she couldn't stop thinking about the case. The image of Emily's lifeless body haunted her, along with the cryptic symbol etched into the tree. She parked her car outside her modest house and stepped out into the chilly night air. The streetlights flickered, casting dancing shadows across her yard. Inside, she poured herself a cup of coffee and settled onto the couch, intending to review the files again. But as she reached for the folder, her phone buzzed on the table. It was a text message from an unknown number. They whisper your name in the dark. Clara froze, her blood running cold. Who could have sent this? And how did they know about the whispers she'd felt in the forest? Before she could react, another message appeared. Find the truth or join the shadows. Clara stared at the screen, her heart pounding in her chest. The words seemed to burn into her mind as if they were etched there by the same hand that had carved the symbol into the tree. She quickly snapped a screenshot of the messages before they disappeared, which they inevitably did moments later, leaving her staring at a blank notification screen. Her first instinct was to call Marcus, but something stopped her. Whoever had sent those messages knew something about the case, something personal, and if they were watching her every move, she couldn't risk tipping them off just yet. Instead, she grabbed a pen and paper, jotting down everything she could remember about the texts, word for word. Then she locked her phone in a drawer and turned off all the lights in her house, except for one dim lamp in the corner. The room felt smaller, somehow more claustrophobic despite its usual comfort. Clara sat on the edge of her couch, her thoughts racing. Who would send such a message? Was it a prank or something far more sinister? And what did it mean by join the shadows? The phrase echoed in her mind, conjuring images of Emily's lifeless body lying beneath the shadowy trees. She decided to focus on the facts. The symbol, the whispers, the mysterious texts. They were all connected somehow. But how? And why target her specifically? The next morning, Clara arrived at the station earlier than usual, determined to dig deeper into the history of the cult of the Whispering Shadows. Marcus greeted her with a steaming cup of coffee, his usual cheerful demeanor replaced by a look of concern. "You look like you didn't sleep," he remarked, handing her the mug. "I didn't," Clara admitted, taking a sip of the hot liquid. "Something happened last night." Marcus raised an eyebrow, waiting for her to elaborate. Clara hesitated, then showed him the screenshots of the text messages. His expression darkened immediately. "This isn't good," he muttered. "Do you think it's related to the cult?" "It has to be," Clara said firmly. "Whoever sent these knows something about the case, maybe even about Emily's murder." Marcus nodded slowly. "We need to find out more about this cult fast. I've been going through old records and found some interesting stuff. Apparently, the cult disbanded decades ago after several members were arrested for ritualistic crimes. But there are rumors that some of them went underground, continuing their practices in secret. And now someone might be reviving them," Clara finished grimly. "It makes sense. The symbols, the forest location. It all fits." "Exactly," Marcus agreed. "But here's the thing. According to local legends, the cult believed that certain individuals were chosen by the spirits to carry out their will. They called them the Marked. These people supposedly bore signs or symbols on their bodies proving their connection to the other world." Clara frowned, processing the information. "Are you saying Emily might have been one of these Marked?" "It's possible," Marcus said cautiously. "Or maybe someone thought she was. Either way, we need to figure out who's behind this and why they targeted her." As the day wore on, Clara and Marcus dove deeper into their research, uncovering more disturbing details about the cult's activities. They learned that the group had performed ceremonies in the forest, often under the cover of darkness. Their rituals involved chanting, carving symbols into trees, and sometimes blood sacrifices, all in the name of communing with the spirits. But what chilled Clara most was the discovery of a list of names. It was handwritten on yellowed parchment and tucked away in the archives under layers of dust. The names appeared to belong to members of the original cult, along with notes about their roles and contributions. One name stood out among the rest: Elias Blackwood. "He was the leader," Marcus explained, pointing to the entry. "According to the records, he disappeared shortly after the cult was exposed. No one knows what happened to him." Clara studied the name, feeling a strange unease settle over her. There was something familiar about it, though she couldn't quite place it. She made a mental note to investigate further. Later that afternoon, Clara decided to visit Emily's family, hoping to learn more about the victim's life and perhaps uncover any connections to the cult. Emily's mother, Sarah Carter, greeted her at the door, her eyes red from crying. The house was quiet, save for the soft ticking of a clock on the wall. "I'm so sorry for your loss, Mrs. Carter," Clara said gently. "I promise we're doing everything we can to find out who did this." Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you, Detective. Emily, she was such a bright light. I can't believe anyone would want to hurt her." Clara hesitated, unsure how to broach the subject of the cult without alarming the grieving mother. "Did Emily ever mention anything unusual happening recently? Any strange encounters or symbols she might have seen?" Sarah frowned, thinking for a moment. "Now that you mention it, she did say something odd a few weeks ago. She told me she kept seeing strange markings around town carved into trees and walls. At the time, I thought she was imagining things, but now—" Clara leaned forward, her pulse quickening. "What else did she say?" "She said it felt like someone was watching her," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "Like shadows following her everywhere she went. I told her it was just stress from school, but now I wonder—" Clara thanked Sarah for her time, promising to keep her updated on the investigation. As she drove back to the station, her mind raced with possibilities. If Emily had noticed the symbols before her death, it meant the killer, or killers, had been stalking her for weeks. But why? What had made her a target? That evening, Clara met Marcus at a secluded diner on the outskirts of town, where they often discussed cases away from prying ears. Over plates of greasy burgers and fries, they pieced together what they knew so far. "The timing is too coincidental," Clara said, stabbing a fry with her fork. "Emily starts noticing the symbols and then ends up dead with one carved above her body. Someone wanted her silenced." "But why?" Marcus asked, leaning back in his chair. If the cult really is involved, they must have had a reason. Maybe she stumbled onto something she wasn't supposed to see. Or maybe she was part of it, Clara countered, surprising even herself with the suggestion. Think about it. If the cult believes in marking certain individuals, maybe Emily was one of them, whether she realized it or not. Marcus frowned, considering the idea. If that's true, then whoever killed her wasn't acting alone. This could be bigger than we thought. Before they could delve deeper into the theory, Clara's phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from an unknown number. Her stomach tightened as she answered cautiously. "Detective Hayes," she said, her voice steady despite the knot forming in her chest. There was silence on the other end, followed by a low, raspy whisper. "You're getting closer." The line went dead, leaving Clara staring at her phone in stunned silence. Marcus looked at her expectantly. "What did they say?" he asked. "They know we're investigating," Clara replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "And they're warning us." For the first time since starting the case, Clara felt truly afraid. Whoever was behind this wasn't just dangerous. They were watching her every move. And if she wasn't careful, she might end up like Emily, lying cold and forgotten beneath the whispering shadows. Clara's mind raced as she tried to make sense of the latest development. The voice on the phone had been distorted, almost mechanical, but there was no mistaking the threat behind the words. Whoever it was knew they were closing in, and they weren't afraid to escalate things. "We need to be careful," Clara said to Marcus, her voice tight with urgency. "If they're watching us, we can't assume anything is safe. Not our phones, not our offices, not even this diner." Marcus nodded, his expression grim. "Agreed. From now on, we keep everything offline. No digital records, no texts, nothing that could be traced back to us." Clara agreed, and they quickly finished their meal before heading out into the night. As they stepped outside, the air felt heavier than usual, the kind of oppressive stillness that precedes a storm. The streetlights flickered, casting long, uneven shadows across the pavement. Clara couldn't shake the feeling that they were being followed, though. When she glanced over her shoulder, the road appeared empty. Back at the station, Clara and Marcus set up a makeshift command center in an unused storage room far from prying eyes. They spread out maps, photographs, and documents covering every surface with evidence related to the case. At the center of it all was the photograph of the symbol carved into the tree above Emily's body. It seemed to pulse with malevolent energy, as if daring them to uncover its secrets. "This symbol has to mean something," Clara muttered, tracing its jagged lines with her finger. "It's too deliberate, too specific." "I've seen something like it before," Marcus said suddenly, his brow furrowing in concentration. "Wait, it's coming to me. Back when I was working Vice, there was a guy who used to hang around the outskirts of town. He called himself the Keeper. Rumor had it he was obsessed with ancient symbols and rituals. Do you think he might have ties to the cult?" Clara asked, leaning forward. "It's possible," Marcus replied. "He disappeared years ago, but if anyone knows about these symbols, it's him. Problem is, finding him won't be easy." Clara didn't hesitate. "Then we start looking. Where was he last seen?" Marcus pulled out a map marking a spot deep in the forest near an abandoned cabin. "This is where he supposedly holed up. If he's still alive, that's where we'll find him." The next morning, armed with flashlights and supplies, Clara and Marcus ventured into the dense woods following the trail marked on the map. The forest was eerily quiet, the only sounds the crunch of leaves underfoot and the occasional rustle of branches overhead. The further they went, the darker it became, as if the trees themselves were conspiring to block out the sunlight. After hours of hiking, they finally reached the cabin, or what remained of it. The structure was dilapidated, its wooden walls warped and covered in moss. The windows were shattered and the door hung crookedly on its hinges. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of decay and damp earth. Clara scanned the room, her flashlight beam cutting through the gloom, revealing piles of rotting books, strange artifacts and symbols scrawled on the walls. "This place gives me the creeps," Marcus muttered, staying close to Clara. "Stay sharp," Clara whispered, her instincts on high alert. "We're not alone here." As if on cue, a low growl echoed through the cabin, sending shivers down their spines. From the shadows emerged a figure hunched and gaunt, his face obscured by a hood. In one hand, he clutched a staff adorned with feathers and bones, while the other held a knife glinting ominously in the dim light. "You shouldn't have come here," the figure rasped, his voice barely human. "The shadows don't take kindly to intruders." Clara raised her hand slowly, showing she meant no harm. "We're detectives investigating a murder. We need your help." The figure tilted his head, studying them with piercing eyes that seemed to glow faintly in the darkness. "Murder? Or something more?" "We found this symbol near the victim's body," Clara said, pulling out a photo of the carving. "Do you recognize it?" The figure froze, his grip tightening on the staff. For a moment he said nothing. Then he let out a harsh laugh that sent chills down their spines. "You've awakened something you don't understand," he said, stepping closer. "The whispering shadows. They choose their own. And once chosen, there's no escape." "What do you mean?" Clara pressed, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. "Who are they?" "They are the forgotten ones, the spirits trapped between worlds." The figure explained, his tone almost reverent. "They speak through the shadows, guiding those who hear their call. But beware, detective. Their guidance comes at a price." Before Clara could ask another question, the figure lunged at them, brandishing the knife. Marcus reacted quickly, tackling him to the ground, while Clara scrambled to restrain him. Despite his frail appearance, the man fought with surprising strength, thrashing and snarling like a wild animal. Finally, they managed to subdue him, tying his hands with zip ties. "We need answers," Clara shouted, shaking him roughly. "Why did you attack us? What do you know about Emily Carter?" The man stopped struggling, his breathing ragged. When he spoke again, his voice was calm, eerily so. "You already know enough to put yourself in danger. Leave now while you still can." And with that, he spat at her feet before falling silent, refusing to say another word. Frustrated but unwilling to risk further confrontation, Clara and Marcus left the cabin, taking photos of the artifacts and symbols inside. As they made their way back to the car, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every shadow seemed to move just out of the corner of her eye, and the whispers she'd felt before returned louder this time, almost forming words. When they finally returned to the station, Clara pored over the new evidence, piecing together what they'd learned. The keeper's cryptic warnings only deepened the mystery, but one thing was clear. Whoever, or whatever, was behind Emily's murder wasn't done yet. That night, as Clara lay in bed trying to sleep, the whispers grew louder until they filled her mind completely. She bolted upright, drenched in sweat, her heart pounding. On her bedside table, her phone lit up with a single message. "The shadows are calling your name." Clara stared at the message on her phone, her hands trembling as she tried to steady herself. The words seemed to seep into her very soul, chilling her to the bone. She knew it wasn't just a random threat, it was personal. Whoever was behind this knew exactly how to get under her skin, and they were playing with her like a cat toys with a mouse. She grabbed her notebook and began writing furiously, jotting down every detail she could remember from the case so far. The symbol, the keeper's warnings, Emily's death, the strange whispers that had plagued her since the beginning. As she wrote, one thought kept circling back in her mind. The cult wasn't just some ancient group of lunatics dabbling in dark rituals. They were still active, and they weren't operating alone. By morning, Clara felt no closer to answers, but her determination had only grown stronger. She arrived at the station early, finding Marcus already there, sifting through the photos they'd taken at the keeper's cabin. His face was pale and drawn, as though he hadn't slept either. "You look like hell," Clara said dryly, dropping her bag on the desk. "Thanks, same to you," Marcus replied without looking up. "I've been going over these symbols all night. Some of them match the ones we found near Emily's body, but others, they're different, more intricate, almost like a code." "A code?" Clara asked, leaning over his shoulder. Sure enough, the symbols carved into the walls of the cabin were more elaborate than the one above Emily's body. They formed patterns that seemed to repeat themselves, yet shifted slightly each time, as if conveying a hidden message. "What do you think it means?" she asked. "I don't know yet," Marcus admitted, rubbing his temples. "But I called in a favor with an old friend who specializes in cryptology. He's supposed to stop by later today." As if on cue, the door swung open and a man walked in carrying a leather satchel slung over his shoulder. He was tall and wiry, with glasses perched precariously on his nose and a disheveled mop of curly hair. His name was Dr. Elliot Grayson, a linguist and historian known for deciphering ancient texts in obscure languages. "Marcus told me you needed help," Elliot said, setting his bag down on the table. Show me what you got. Clara handed him the photos, watching intently as he studied them. After several minutes of silent analysis, he pushed his glasses up his nose and let out a low whistle. These aren't just random carvings, he said, his voice tinged with awe. They're part of a larger system, a language of sorts. Based on my initial assessment, they appear to be instructions or perhaps commands. Commands for what? Clara pressed. Elliot hesitated, clearly, choosing his words carefully. From what I can tell, they're meant to summon something or someone. These symbols are designed to channel energy, focus, intent. In essence, they're opening a doorway. A doorway to where? Marcus asked incredulously. To another realm, Elliot replied matter-of-factly, at least according to the mythology surrounding groups like the Cult of the Whispering Shadows. They believe that certain individuals, the marked, as you mentioned earlier, could serve as conduits between worlds. By carving these symbols and performing rituals, they claim to communicate with spirits or even bring them into our world. Clara felt a shiver run down her spine. If what Elliot was saying was true, then Emily hadn't just been a victim of a random killing. She had been chosen, deliberately sacrificed to fulfill some twisted purpose. But why Emily? Clara murmured aloud. What made her special? Elliot shrugged. That's the million-dollar question. It could be anything. Her birth date, her location, her personality traits. Without knowing more about their selection process, it's impossible to say. Clara nodded absently, her mind racing. There had to be a pattern, a reason why Emily had been targeted. But where to start? Just then, Officer Ben Miller burst into the room, his face flushed with excitement. Detective Hayes, you need to see this. Clara followed him to the main office, where a large screen displayed footage from a security camera positioned outside a local convenience store. The timestamp showed it was taken 2 nights before Emily's murder. On the screen, a figure could be seen lurking near the edge of the frame, partially obscured by shadows. What caught Clara's attention wasn't the figure itself, but the object clutched in its hand, a knife glinting faint, similar to the one used to carve the symbol into the tree. Did you enhance the image? Clara asked, her pulse quickening. Ben nodded, pulling up a zoomed-in version of the frame. While the figure's face remained obscured, the knife was now clearly visible, etched with the same symbol they'd been studying. This is it, Clara said, her voice firm with resolve. We have our lead. With renewed energy, Clara and Marcus set out to track down the mysterious figure, using the grainy footage as their starting point. They canvassed the area, interviewing shopkeepers and residents, hoping someone might recognize the person in the video. Their efforts paid off when a young cashier named Mia recalled seeing someone matching the description hanging around the store frequently. He always wore a hood and kept to himself, Mia explained nervously, twisting her apron in her hands. But I remember his eyes. They were cold, like he wasn't really looking at you, but through you. Do you know where he went after leaving here? Clara asked. Mia shook her head. No, but sometimes I'd see him heading toward the forest. He carried that knife everywhere, like it was part of him. The forest again. Clara exchanged a glance with Marcus, both of them thinking the same thing. Whoever this person was, they were deeply connected to the cult and its activities. That evening, Clara decided to return to the forest alone, determined to confront whatever, or whoever, was waiting for her. Armed with a flashlight and her service weapon, she ventured deep into the woods, following the faint trail of whispers that had haunted her dreams. The air grew colder with each step, the trees closing in around her, like silent sentinels. Finally, she reached a clearing bathed in moonlight. At its center stood a stone altar surrounded by candles that flickered despite the absence of wind. Carved into the altar was the same symbol they'd been chasing all along. Standing beside it was the hooded figure from the video, his knife raised high, as if ready to strike. Who are you? Clara demanded, stepping forward, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. The figure turned slowly, lowering his hood to reveal a face eerily familiar. It was Elias Blackwood, the cult leader presumed missing decades ago. His eyes burned with an unnatural light as he spoke, his voice echoing unnaturally in the stillness. The shadows chose you, Clara, he said, his lips curling into a sinister smile. And now you will join them. Before Clara could react, the ground beneath her feet began to tremble, and the whispers erupted into deafening screams. Shadows swirled around her, forming shapes that reached out with claw-like fingers. She fired her gun instinctively, but the bullets passed harmlessly through the apparitions. As the darkness closed in, Clara realized the truth too late. This wasn't just a case. It was a war against forces beyond comprehension, and she was standing on the front lines. Clara's heart pounded in her chest as the shadows coiled around her, like living tendrils, their cold touch seeping into her skin. The world seemed to warp and twist reality, bending under the weight of something far older and darker than she could comprehend. Elias Blackwood stood motionless, his knife gleaming in the moonlight, as if it were drinking in the chaos unfolding before him. "You can't fight them," he said, his voice calm, yet dripping with malice. "They've been waiting for you, Clara, whispering your name since the day you were born." "What are you talking about?" Clara shouted, her voice trembling, despite her attempt to sound brave. She backed away slowly, her flashlight beam cutting through the swirling darkness, but offering little comfort. The shadows seemed alive, feeding off her fear, growing stronger with every passing second. Elias tilted his head, studying her, as though she were an insect trapped beneath glass. "You don't remember, do you? How could you? Your parents tried so hard to protect you from the truth. But blood calls to blood, Clara, and yours sings louder than most." Clara froze, confusion battling with terror inside her. "My parents? What does this have to do with them?" Elias smiled, a cruel, predatory grin that sent shivers down her spine. "They thought they could hide you from us, bury you in lies and false memories. But the shadows never forget. They marked you long before you took your first breath." Before Clara could respond, the ground beneath her feet cracked open, revealing a chasm filled with writhing black mist. The whispers grew louder now, forming words, fragmented sentences that clawed at her mind. "Join us. Let go. You belong to us." Clara stumbled backward, nearly losing her footing, as the mist surged upward, enveloping her legs, pulling her toward the abyss. Panic seized her, and she fired her gun wildly at the encroaching darkness, but the bullets did nothing to stop it. The pull was relentless, unyielding. "Why are you doing this?" she screamed, desperation edging her voice. Elias stepped closer, his eyes glowing with an unnatural light. "Because the shadows demand it. Because you are one of them, whether you accept it or not. And because I promised them a sacrifice worthy of their power." With that, he lunged at her knife, raised high, ready to deliver the final blow. But just as the blade descended, Clara reacted on pure instinct, kicking out with all her strength. Her boot connected with Elias's wrist, sending the knife clattering to the ground. Seizing the moment, she scrambled to her feet, breaking free from the shadowy grasp and sprinting toward the trees. The forest erupted into chaos behind her as Elias roared in fury. The shadows surged after her, faster than she could run, their whispers turning into ear-splitting shrieks. Branches tore at her clothes, leaves slapped against her face, but she didn't dare look back. Every step felt heavier, as if the forest itself was conspiring to slow her down. Finally, she burst into a clearing where moonlight streamed down unobstructed. Gasping for breath, she turned to face her pursuers, only to find the shadows retreating back into the woods, melting away like smoke in the wind. For a brief moment, silence returned, broken only by the sound of her ragged breathing. But the respite was short-lived. As Clara caught her breath, she realized something was wrong. The symbol carved into the altar had imprinted itself onto her palm, burning like fire. She stared at it, horrified, as faint lines began to spread across her skin, forming patterns eerily similar to those she'd seen in the keeper's cabin. "No," she whispered, clutching her hand to her chest. "This can't be happening." A sudden rustling in the bushes snapped her out of her daze. Marcus emerged, panting heavily, his flashlight beam sweeping across the clearing. "Clara," he called, relief evident in his voice. "Are you okay? I saw you run in here." Before he could finish his sentence, Clara held up her hand, showing him the glowing symbol etched into her skin. His eyes widened in shock. "What the hell is that?" he asked, stepping closer. "I don't know," Clara admitted, her voice shaking. "But I think they've marked me." Marcus frowned clearly, struggling to process what he was seeing. "We need to get you out of here. Now!" He grabbed her arm, gently urging her toward the edge of the forest, but Clara resisted. "No, Marcus. We can't leave. Not yet. If we go now, they'll follow us. They'll come after everyone." "Then what do you suggest we do?" Marcus asked, his tone urgent. "We're outnumbered, outmatched, and whatever the hell is going on here is way beyond anything we've dealt with before." Clara hesitated, her mind racing. Then it hit her. The artifacts, the symbols, the Keeper's warnings. Everything pointed to one thing: knowledge. To fight back, they needed to understand the enemy. "We go back to the cabin," she said firmly. "There has to be something there. A clue, a weakness, anything that can help us stop this." Marcus looked skeptical but nodded. "All right, but we're not doing this alone. We bring backup." "No time," Clara countered. "By the time we explain everything and rally support, it'll be too late. This needs to happen now." Reluctantly, Marcus agreed, and together they made their way back to the Keeper's cabin, moving quickly and quietly through the forest. When they arrived, the place looked exactly as they'd left it, except for one detail. The door was slightly ajar. "Someone's been here," Marcus whispered, drawing his weapon. Clara nodded, gripping hers tightly as they pushed the door open. Inside, the air was thick with tension, the faint scent of sulfur lingering in the room. The artifacts they'd photographed earlier were scattered across the floor, as if someone, or something, had searched frantically for something. In the center of the chaos stood a figure cloaked in tattered robes, its face obscured by a mask made of bone. "You shouldn't have come back," the figure rasped, its voice echoing unnaturally. "The shadows are hungry." Without warning, it lunged at them, wielding a staff topped with a jagged crystal that pulsed with dark energy. Clara ducked just in time, avoiding a blow that would have knocked her unconscious. Marcus fired a shot, but the bullet ricocheted harmlessly off the crystal, embedding itself in the wall. The figure moved with unnatural speed, its movements fluid and precise. It swung the staff again, this time aiming for Marcus, who barely managed to dodge. Clara seized the opportunity, grabbing a nearby artifact, an ornate dagger, and lunging at the figure. Her strike landed true, slicing through the fabric of its robe. For a split second, the figure staggered, revealing pale, translucent skin beneath. Its eyes glowed with the same eerie light as Elias's, and it let out a guttural scream that shook the very foundations of the cabin. Then it dissolved into a cloud of black smoke, vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. Breathing heavily, Clara and Marcus exchanged a glance, both of them shaken but alive. On the floor where the figure had stood lay a book bound in cracked leather, its pages yellowed with age. Clara picked it up carefully, examining the cover, which bore the same symbol now burned into her palm. "This must be it," she said, her voice filled with grim determination. "The key to stopping them." As they flipped through the pages, the writing inside was unlike anything they'd ever seen. A mix of ancient runes and cryptic diagrams accompanied by sketches of grotesque creatures and rituals. Some sections were written in Latin, others in languages neither of them recognized. But one phrase repeated itself throughout the text: "Only the marked may seal the gate." Clara stared at the words, her stomach sinking. Whatever this meant, it involved her directly. The mark on her hand throbbed painfully as if responding to the text. "We need Elliot," Marcus said, breaking the silence. "If anyone can decipher this, it's him." Clara nodded, reluctantly agreeing. They couldn't do this alone. Not anymore. But as they prepared to leave the cabin, the whispers returned louder than ever, filling the air with promises of death and despair. "They're coming," Clara murmured, gripping the book tightly. "And when they do, we'll be ready." Clara and Marcus hurried back to the station, their minds racing with questions and fears. The book weighed heavily in Clara's hands, both literally and figuratively, a tangible reminder of the danger they were facing. Every step felt like a race against time, as if the shadows themselves were closing in faster with each passing moment. When they arrived, Elliot was already waiting for them, his face pale but resolute. He had been briefed on the situation during their frantic phone call, and though visibly shaken, he seemed determined to help. "This is bad," he muttered, taking the book from Clara's trembling hands. "Really bad." "Tell us something we don't know," Marcus snapped, pacing the room like a caged animal. Elliot ignored him, flipping through the pages, his eyes scanning the text with growing concern. "This isn't just a ritual guide. It's a manual for summoning entities from another realm. These symbols act as anchors, binding them to our world. If someone uses this knowledge improperly, they open a permanent gateway." Clara finished, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's what Elias wants. That's why Emily was sacrificed." Elliot nodded gravely. "Exactly. And once that gate is open, there's no telling what will come through, or how much destruction it will cause." Clara clenched her fists, frustration boiling inside her. How do we stop it? There has to be a way to close the gate or destroy the symbols. There is, Elliot said hesitantly, but it requires someone who's already connected to the shadows. Someone marked. All eyes turned to Clara. She swallowed hard, feeling the weight of their stares pressing down on her. The mark on her palm burned faintly as if echoing Elliot's words. I'm not doing this alone, she said firmly, meeting Marcus's gaze. Whatever happens, we're in this together. Marcus stepped forward, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. You're damn right we are. We'll figure this out, Clara. Together. Elliot cleared his throat, drawing their attention back to the book. There's one more thing. To seal the gate, you'll need an artifact, a relic tied to the original cult. Something powerful enough to disrupt the connection between realms. What kind of artifact? Clara asked, dread creeping into her voice. Elliot hesitated before answering. The Dagger of Shadows. It's mentioned here as the key to severing the link. But according to legend, it was lost centuries ago, buried deep within the forest. Great, Marcus muttered sarcastically. So now we're treasure hunting too? It's our only shot, Clara said, her tone leaving no room for argument. We find the dagger, seal the gate, and put an end to this nightmare. With renewed purpose, they set out once again, venturing deeper into the forest, guided by cryptic clues hidden within the book. The journey was grueling, the terrain treacherous, and the air thick with an oppressive silence that made every sound, the snap of a twig, the rustle of leaves, feel deafening. As they pressed on, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, every shadow shifting unnaturally around them. After hours of searching, they finally reached a clearing dominated by an ancient stone circle. At its center stood a pedestal carved with intricate designs matching those in the book. Resting atop it was the Dagger of Shadows, its blade black as midnight and etched with glowing runes. Clara approached cautiously, her heart pounding in her chest. As she reached for the dagger, the ground trembled violently, and the whispers returned louder than ever, forming a cacophony of voices that threatened to overwhelm her senses. Hurry! Marcus shouted, grabbing her arm as dark shapes began to emerge from the trees surrounding them. Clara snatched the dagger from the pedestal, feeling a surge of energy course through her body. The mark on her palm flared brightly, reacting to the weapon's power. Without hesitation, she turned to face the encroaching shadows, her resolve hardened. Stay behind me, she commanded, raising the dagger defensively. The figures advanced slowly, their forms shifting and distorting unnaturally. Among them was Elias Blackwood, his eyes blazing with fury. You think you can defy the shadows, Clara? He sneered. They will consume you just as they consumed Emily. You're wrong, Clara replied, her voice steady, despite the fear clawing at her insides. I won't let you win. With that, she plunged the dagger into the ground, driving it deep into the earth. A blinding light erupted from the impact, engulfing the clearing in radiant brilliance. The shadows screamed in agony, dissolving into nothingness as the gate began to collapse. Elias staggered backward, clutching his head as if in immense pain. No! This cannot be! But it was too late. The light intensified until Clara could no longer see anything except white. When the brightness faded, the forest was silent once more. The oppressive weight lifted from the air. The stone circle lay shattered, the pedestal reduced to rubble. Breathing heavily, Clara turned to Marcus and Elliot, both of whom looked as stunned as she felt. The dagger remained embedded in the ground, its glow dimming, but still present. It's over, Clara whispered, sinking to her knees, exhausted but relieved. For now at least the shadows were gone. But as she stared at the mark on her palm, still faintly glowing, she couldn't shake the feeling that their victory was temporary. The shadows might have retreated, but they hadn't been destroyed, not completely. And somewhere in the depths of the forest, Elias Blackwood stirred his laughter, echoing softly in the darkness. The silence that followed the collapse of the gate was almost deafening. Clara sat on the damp forest floor, her body trembling from exhaustion and adrenaline. The dagger remained embedded in the earth, its faint glow pulsing rhythmically as if it were alive. Around them, the forest seemed to exhale, releasing the tension that had gripped it for so long. Yet despite the apparent victory, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was still out there watching. Marcus crouched beside her, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. You did it, Clara. You stopped them. Did I? She asked, her voice hollow. She glanced at the mark on her palm, which, though dimmer than before, still glowed faintly. It doesn't feel over. Not really. Elliot joined them, his expression grim, as he studied the remnants of the stone circle. She's right. Sealing the gate may have disrupted their connection, but it didn't destroy the source of their power. As long as the shadows exist, they'll find another way to return. Clara frowned, processing his words. So what do we do now? Wait for them to come back stronger? No, Elliot replied firmly. We prepare. We learn everything we can about the cult, their rituals, and their weaknesses. Knowledge is our best weapon against them. Marcus nodded in agreement. And we keep the dagger safe. If Elias or anyone else tries to reopen the gate, we'll be ready. Clara stood slowly, wincing as her legs protested the movement. Then let's get out of here. We've got work to do. As they made their way back to the station, the oppressive atmosphere of the forest began to lift, replaced by the crisp freshness of dawn breaking over the horizon. But even as sunlight filtered through the trees, Clara couldn't ignore the gnawing sense of unease in her gut. Every shadow seemed to shift just slightly out of sync with reality. Every rustle of leaves carried an echo of whispers. Back at the station, Clara immediately set up a secure workspace, locking away all evidence related to the case, including the book and the dagger. She knew they couldn't risk anyone finding out about what had happened. Not yet. For now, secrecy was their greatest ally. Over the next few days, Clara, Marcus, and Elliot worked tirelessly poring over the ancient text, deciphering its cryptic language, and piecing together the cult's history. What they uncovered was both fascinating and terrifying. The cult of the Whispering Shadows hadn't merely been a group of delusional fanatics. They had tapped into forces far older and more powerful than humanity could comprehend. Their rituals weren't just ceremonies. They were pact sacrifices offered to entities that existed beyond the veil of reality. Their goal wasn't just to summon these beings, Elliot explained, pointing to a diagram in the book. They wanted to merge worlds, to bring the shadows fully into ours. That's why they needed conduits like Emily and you. Clara shuddered at the implication. So they weren't just killing people, they were turning them into anchors. Exactly, Elliot said gravely. And if Elias succeeds in reopening the gate, those anchors will amplify the connection, making it nearly impossible to sever again. The realization sent a chill down Clara's spine. They had won this round, but the war was far from over. Somewhere out there, Elias Blackwood was regrouping, plotting his next move. And when he struck again, they would need to be prepared. That night, as Clara lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the whispers returned, softer this time, but unmistakable. They weren't coming from outside. They were inside her head, weaving through her thoughts like threads of smoke. At first, they were indistinct murmurs, but gradually they formed words. You cannot escape us. Clara bolted upright, her heart racing. She glanced at her palm where the mark still lingered, its glow faint but persistent. Swinging her legs over the side of the bed, she grabbed her phone and dialed Marcus's number. Clara? Marcus answered groggily. Do you know what time it is? They're talking to me, she whispered, her voice trembling. The shadows. They're in my head. There was a pause, then Marcus's tone shifted to one of urgency. Stay calm. I'm coming over. Within minutes, Marcus arrived, carrying a flashlight and a thermos of coffee. Together, they sat in Clara's living room, trying to make sense of what was happening. The whispers continued growing louder and more insistent, until Clara felt as though her skull might split open. It's the mark, Marcus said finally. Somehow it's amplifying their presence. But why now? Clara asked, clutching her head. Why after we sealed the gate? Maybe sealing the gate didn't weaken them as much as we thought, Marcus suggested. Or maybe it triggered something, a fail-safe designed to ensure the connection remains intact. Clara shook her head, frustration bubbling to the surface. This isn't fair. Why me? Why am I the one they chose? Marcus hesitated, clearly struggling to find the right words. Because you're strong, Clara. Stronger than anyone else I know. Maybe that's why they targeted you. And maybe that's why you're the only one who can stop them. His words offered little comfort, but Clara appreciated the sentiment. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to focus. Panicking wouldn't solve anything. If the shadows wanted a fight, she would give them one, but on her terms. The following morning, Clara called a meeting with Marcus and Elliot determined to devise a plan. They gathered in the secure room surrounded by maps, books, and notes spread across every available surface. "We need to take the fight to them," Clara declared, her voice firm with resolve. "If Elias is planning something, we can't afford to wait around and let him strike first." Elliot nodded in agreement. "Agreed. But we'll need more than brute force. We need to understand how the shadows operate, what fuels them, and how to counteract their influence. And we need allies," Marcus added. "People we can trust who won't panic when things get weird." Clara considered this thoughtfully. Trust was a rare commodity, especially given the nature of their investigation. But there were a few individuals she knew she could count on, starting with Sheriff Grayson. Though he often clashed with her methods, he was a good man who cared deeply about protecting the town. "I'll talk to Grayson," Clara said finally. "He deserves to know the truth, at least part of it." With that decision made, they split up, each taking on a different task. Clara approached Grayson cautiously, revealing only enough information to convince him of the danger without overwhelming him. To her relief, he agreed to help, keeping their efforts under wraps while providing whatever resources they needed. Meanwhile, Marcus reached out to a contact in the state police department, securing access to advanced surveillance equipment and tactical support. And Elliot dove deeper into the book, uncovering new insights about the cult's vulnerabilities. As the days passed, Clara noticed subtle changes within herself. The mark on her palm no longer caused her pain, but instead seemed to hum with energy, connecting her to something vast and unknowable. She could feel the shadows whispering constantly now, their voices a constant murmur in the background of her mind. At times it was maddening, but she refused to let it control her. Instead, she focused on channeling the energy into something useful, using it to sharpen her instincts and heighten her awareness. One evening as she walked home from the station, she felt a sudden pull, a tug deep within her chest, drawing her toward the forest. Against her better judgment, she followed the sensation, stepping off the beaten path and into the trees. The air grew colder with each step, the familiar whispers growing louder, until they became a deafening roar. Ahead of her stood Elias Blackwood, his knife raised high, his eyes glowing with an unnatural light. Behind him loomed a massive, shadowy figure, its form shifting and distorting unnaturally. "You shouldn't have come alone, Clara," Elias said, his voice dripping with malice. "But I suppose it makes my job easier." Clara clenched her fists, determination hardening her features. "Your games end here, Elias." With that, she lunged forward, the energy coursing through her body, propelling her movements. The battle that ensued was fierce and chaotic, but Clara fought with everything she had, driven by a singular purpose: to protect her town, her friends, and herself from the darkness threatening to consume them all. Clara moved with a speed and precision she didn't know she possessed, her body fueled by the strange energy emanating from the mark on her palm. Elias swung his knife, aiming for her throat, but she sidestepped just in time, countering with a swift kick to his midsection. The impact sent him stumbling backward, but he recovered quickly, his movements unnaturally fluid, as if guided by forces beyond human capability. Behind him, the shadowy figure loomed larger now, its form solidifying into something grotesque, a towering mass of writhing tendrils and glowing eyes that seemed to pierce through Clara's very soul. It let out a low, guttural growl that reverberated through the forest, shaking the ground beneath their feet. "You can't win, Clara," Elias taunted, his voice echoing unnaturally, as though amplified by the entity behind him. "The shadows have chosen you. They've always chosen you." Clara ignored his words, focusing instead on the dagger she had brought with her, the same one that had sealed the gate days earlier. Its presence felt like an anchor, grounding her amidst the chaos. She tightened her grip on it, feeling its weight steady her resolve. "I'm not afraid of you," she said, her voice firm despite the fear clawing at the edges of her mind. "And I'm not your puppet." With that, she charged forward, ducking under another swing of Elias's knife and driving the dagger into his side. He cried out in pain, stumbling back as black smoke began to pour from the wound, dissolving into the air like ink spilled in water. But before Clara could press her advantage, the shadowy figure surged forward, its tendrils lashing out toward her. She barely managed to dodge, rolling to the side as the tendrils slammed into the ground where she had stood moments before. The force of the impact left a crater in the earth, sending shock waves rippling outward. Clara scrambled to her feet, clutching the dagger tightly as the creature turned its gaze on her. Its eyes burned with an otherworldly light, and when it spoke, its voice was a chorus of whispers layered over one another, each word dripping with malice. You cannot deny us forever. Clara gritted her teeth, refusing to let the fear overwhelm her. She raised the dagger, pointing it directly at the creature. I don't need to deny you forever, just long enough to send you back where you came from. The creature roared, lunging at her with impossible speed. Clara reacted instinctively, channeling the energy from the mark on her palm into the dagger. As the blade connected with one of the creature's tendrils, a burst of light erupted from the point of contact, illuminating the entire forest. The tendril disintegrated instantly, leaving the creature momentarily stunned. Seizing the opportunity, Clara darted toward Elias, who was struggling to regain his footing. She grabbed him by the collar, dragging him closer to the edge of the clearing. He struggled weakly, but the wound inflicted by the dagger had sapped much of his strength. You're finished, Elias, she hissed, pressing the tip of the dagger against his throat. Tell me how to destroy it, or I'll make sure the shadows take you first. Elias laughed bitterly, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. You think you can threaten me? You're already part of them, Clara. You've been there since the day you were born. Before she could respond, the shadowy figure recovered, launching another attack. Clara shoved Elias aside, diving out of the way, as the creature's tendrils swept past her, narrowly missing her head. She landed hard on the ground, the wind knocked out of her lungs, but she forced herself back up, adrenaline keeping her moving. As the battle raged, Marcus and Elliot arrived, having tracked Clara's location using GPS coordinates from her phone. They took in the scene with wide eyes. Clara locked in combat with a monstrous entity while Elias lay bleeding nearby. Holy hell! Marcus muttered, raising his weapon. No! Clara shouted, stopping him mid-motion. Don't shoot! It'll only make it stronger. Elliot stepped forward, clutching the ancient book open to a specific page. His hands trembled, but his voice was steady as he began reciting a passage in Latin, the words flowing smoothly despite his nervousness. The shadowy figure froze momentarily, its form flickering, as if disrupted by some unseen force. It's working! Elliot yelled, continuing to chant louder this time. Clara seized the moment, driving the dagger into the ground once more. This time the light that erupted was blinding, spreading outward in waves that seemed to push the shadows back. The creature let out an ear-splitting scream, its form unraveling as the light consumed it piece by piece. Elias watched in horror as the entity he had summoned began to dissolve. With a final desperate cry, he lunged at Clara, attempting to wrestle the dagger away from her. But Clara was faster, twisting around and plunging the blade into his chest. He collapsed, gasping for breath, his eyes wide with shock, as the black smoke poured from his body, dissipating into nothingness. When the light finally faded, the forest was silent, save for the sound of Clara's ragged breathing. The shadowy figure was gone, reduced to ashes scattered across the clearing. Elias lay motionless, his lifeless eyes staring blankly at the sky. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Marcus broke the silence, his voice trembling slightly. Is it over? Clara looked down at the dagger still embedded in the ground, its glow dimmer than ever. She reached out, touching the hilt, and felt a faint pulse of warmth radiate through her fingers. Slowly, she pulled it free, the mark on her palm fading until it disappeared entirely. I think so, she said softly, exhaustion washing over her. But we'll never truly be safe, not as long as people like Elias exist. Elliot nodded gravely. We've bought ourselves time. That's all we can hope for. As they made their way back to the station, the weight of what they had endured settled heavily on their shoulders. Clara knew their lives would never be the same. The experience had changed them irrevocably, binding them together in ways they couldn't fully comprehend. That night, Clara sat alone in her apartment, staring out the window at the quiet streets below. For the first time in weeks, the whispers were silent, replaced by a profound stillness that filled her with both relief and unease. She wondered if she would ever truly escape the shadows, or if they would always linger just out of sight, waiting for their chance to return. But for now, at least, Black Hollow was safe, and that was enough. The silence that settled over Black Hollow after that fateful night was eerie in a way that defied explanation. The streets remained as quiet and unassuming as ever, bathed in the pale glow of moonlight, but the air carried an almost imperceptible weight. a lingering presence that seemed to hover just beyond perception. It wasn't peace. It was more like a fragile ceasefire between worlds. Clara tried to return to her routine, throwing herself into paperwork and mundane investigations. But no amount of distraction could drown out the memories. She would wake up in the middle of the night drenched in cold sweat, her heart racing as fragments of whispers echoed faintly at the edges of her consciousness. They weren't as loud or intrusive as before, but they were there, whispering her name, taunting her with promises of inevitability. "Are you okay?" Marcus asked one morning as they sat together in the dimly lit office. His voice was gentle, yet laced with concern, his eyes studying her face intently. "Yeah, I'm fine," Clara replied, though her gaze remained fixed on the empty coffee mug cradled between her hands. "It's just memories." Marcus didn't look convinced, but he didn't push. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "If you need to talk, I'm here." The simplicity of his words struck a chord deep within Clara. For the first time in what felt like forever, she realized someone truly understood, or at least tried to. Perhaps it was because Marcus had been there, standing shoulder to shoulder with her when the shadows threatened to consume them all. Or maybe it was simply the bond forged through shared trauma. "Thanks," she said softly, finally meeting his gaze. "I'll be all right, just need some time." But time wasn't something Clara could afford. The mark on her palm may have faded, but its absence left behind a void. A constant reminder that the shadows hadn't disappeared entirely. They were waiting, biding their time until someone reopened the gate. Over the next few weeks, life in Black Hollow returned to its usual rhythm, or so it seemed on the surface. The townsfolk went about their business, unaware of the horrors that had unfolded mere miles away in the depths of the forest. Sheriff Grayson kept the investigation under wraps, citing vague explanations about animal attacks to explain Emily Carter's death. No one questioned it too deeply. After all, people in small towns preferred not to dwell on unpleasant truths. For Clara, however, the illusion of normalcy was shattered. Every shadow seemed longer, every sound sharper. Even the rustle of leaves in the wind sent shivers down her spine. She avoided the forest altogether, unable to shake the feeling that something, or someone, was watching her from within the trees. Elliot, too, struggled to move past the events. Though he had deciphered ancient texts and unraveled cryptic symbols, the knowledge weighed heavily on him. He spent countless hours poring over the book they had recovered from the keeper's cabin, searching for answers to questions they hadn't even thought to ask yet. "Do you think we've seen the last of them?" Marcus asked during one of their late-night brainstorming sessions. The three of them, Clara, Marcus, and Elliot, had become an unlikely trio united by necessity and survival. "I don't know," Clara admitted, rubbing her temples. "But if Elias was right about one thing, it's that the shadows are patient. They've waited centuries to breach this world. A temporary setback isn't going to stop them." Elliot nodded grimly. He's correct. The cult's rituals were designed to weaken the barriers between realms, not destroy them entirely. Sealing the gate was a band-aid solution at best. Eventually, someone else will try to reopen it. And when that happens, Clara said firmly, we'll be ready. Despite her determination, Clara couldn't ignore the toll the ordeal had taken on her psyche. The whispers that once plagued her dreams began creeping back into her waking hours, softer now, but persistent. At first, she dismissed them as stress-induced hallucinations, but soon she realized they carried meaning, fragments of warnings, hints of danger lurking just beneath the surface. One afternoon, while reviewing case files at her desk, Clara suddenly froze. Her pen slipped from her fingers as a sharp pain shot through her head, followed by a flood of disjointed images. Elias's glowing eyes, the towering shadowy figure, the dagger pulsing with light. And then, clear as day, a single phrase whispered directly into her mind. "They're closer than you think." She gripped the edge of her desk, breathing deeply to steady herself. When the vision faded, she found Marcus standing in the doorway, his expression concerned. "You okay?" he asked cautiously. "Yeah," Clara lied, forcing a weak smile. "Just tired." But deep down, she knew the truth. The shadows weren't gone. They were inside her, whispering secrets only she could hear. Whether this was a curse or a gift remained unclear, but one thing was certain. The connection she had formed with them during the ritual couldn't be severed completely. That night, Clara decided to confront the whispers head-on. Sitting alone in her apartment, she closed her eyes and focused on the faint murmurs echoing in her mind. At first, they were chaotic, overlapping voices speaking in languages she didn't understand. But as she concentrated, the noise began to coalesce into coherent sentences. "Beware the traitor among you." Clara's eyes snapped open, her heart pounding. A traitor? Who could they mean? Marcus and Elliot had risked their lives to help her close the gate. Surely they weren't involved. And then there was Sheriff Grayson. While he had supported their efforts, his reluctance to delve too deeply into the supernatural aspects of the case had raised suspicions. Could he be hiding something? The next morning, Clara approached Grayson cautiously, feigning casual curiosity. "Hey, Sheriff, can I ask you something?" Grayson looked up from his desk, raising an eyebrow. "What is it, Hayes? You've lived in Black Hollow your whole life, right? Did you ever hear any stories about the cult of the Whispering Shadows?" Grayson hesitated, his expression unreadable. "Why do you want to know?" "Just curious," Clara replied nonchalantly. "We've been digging into old records and some of the details seem off." Grayson sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Look, Clara, I won't lie to you. There were rumors back in the day. Strange disappearances, weird symbols carved into trees. But most folks chalked it up to kids messing around. Why bring it up now?" Clara studied his face carefully, searching for any sign of deception. "No reason, just tying up loose ends." As she walked away, she couldn't shake the feeling that Grayson was holding something back. Was it possible he knew more than he let on? Or worse, was he somehow connected to the cult? Days turned into weeks, and the whispers grew louder, more insistent. Clara began experiencing vivid nightmares that felt disturbingly real. In one particularly unsettling dream, she stood in the clearing where they had sealed the gate, surrounded by figures cloaked in darkness. One of them stepped forward, revealing a face she recognized immediately. Sarah Carter, Emily's mother. "Why did you fail her?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling with grief and anger. "You promised to find justice for my daughter." "I tried," Clara protested, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I did everything I could." "But it's not enough," Sarah continued, her tone growing colder. "The shadows are still here, and they're coming for you." Clara woke with a start, her chest heaving as the dream lingered in her mind. It was a warning, one she couldn't ignore. Later that evening, while reviewing surveillance footage from the convenience store near the forest, Clara noticed something strange. A hooded figure, identical to the one they had encountered in the woods, appeared briefly in the background. The timestamp indicated it had been recorded just hours earlier. "They're back," Clara muttered, showing the footage to Marcus and Elliot. "And they're watching us." "What do we do?" Marcus asked, his voice tense. "We prepare," Clara said firmly. "Whoever these people are, they won't catch us off guard again." As the days passed, Clara became increasingly convinced that the battle against the shadows was far from over. The whispers in her mind grew stronger, guiding her toward hidden truths and forgotten secrets. She began piecing together clues that pointed to a larger conspiracy, one that extended beyond Black Hollow and into darker, more sinister territories. One evening, while examining the ancient book, Elliot stumbled upon a passage detailing a second artifact, the Mirror of Echoes, said to reveal the true nature of those who gazed into it. According to legend, it was hidden in an abandoned asylum on the outskirts of town, a place long rumored to be haunted. "This could be our next step," Clara said, her voice filled with grim determination. "If we find the mirror, we might uncover who's pulling the strings behind all this." Marcus frowned, clearly uneasy. "An abandoned asylum? Really? Can't say I like the sound of that." "Neither do I," Clara admitted. "But if we're going to end this once and for all, we don't have a choice." With that, the trio prepared for their next mission, knowing full well the dangers that awaited them. The shadows were gathering strength, and time was running out. As Clara stared into the distance, the faint glow of the dagger resting on her desk caught her eye. She knew the road ahead would be fraught with peril, but she also knew one thing for certain. The war against the shadows was only beginning. The abandoned asylum loomed on the horizon like a specter from another era. Its crumbling facade was overtaken by ivy, its windows shattered and dark, giving it the appearance of a hollow skull staring blankly at the world. To the townsfolk of Black Hollow, it was a place of whispered legends, a site of tragedy and madness that no one dared approach after sunset. But to Clara, Marcus, and Elliot, it represented their next battleground against the shadows. Clara tightened her grip on the flashlight as they approached the rusted iron gates. The air felt heavier here, thick with an oppressive stillness that made every sound, the creak of metal, the crunch of gravel beneath their boots, echo unnaturally loud. She glanced at Marcus and Elliot, both visibly uneasy but resolute. "Remember," Clara said quietly, her voice steady despite the unease prickling at her spine, "we stick together. No splitting up, no matter what." Marcus nodded, his hand resting on the holster of his weapon. "Got it. Stay close. Watch your back." Elliot adjusted the strap of his satchel, which contained the ancient book and other tools they might need. "And let's hope this mirror actually exists. I'd hate to come all this way for nothing." As they pushed open the gates, the hinges groaned in protest, the sound reverberating through the empty grounds. The asylum's courtyard was overgrown with weeds, and the remnants of old benches lay scattered like broken bones. A chill ran down Clara's spine as she stepped inside, the whispers in her mind growing louder, almost eager. "This place feels wrong," Marcus muttered, scanning the area with his flashlight. "Like it's alive somehow." "It probably is," Clara replied grimly. "If the cult used this place for their rituals, there's no telling what kind of energy lingers here." They moved cautiously toward the main entrance, the massive double doors hanging crookedly on their hinges. Inside, the air was musty and damp, carrying the faint scent of decay. The beam of their flashlights revealed peeling wallpaper, cracked tiles, and graffiti scrawled across the walls, some of it resembling the same symbols they had encountered before. Elliot paused to examine one of the markings, tracing its jagged lines with his fingers. "These aren't just random carvings, they're wards, protections meant to keep something out, or maybe something in." Clara frowned, her instincts screaming at her to stay alert. "Let's keep moving. The sooner we find the mirror, the better." The interior of the asylum was a labyrinth of narrow hallways and decaying rooms, each step taking them deeper into the heart of darkness. The further they ventured, the stronger the whispers became, weaving through Clara's thoughts like insidious threads. She clenched her fists, trying to focus, but the voices grew more insistent. "Turn back while you can. You'll regret what you seek." She shook her head violently, gritting her teeth. "Not now," she muttered under her breath. "I won't let you distract me." "Clara?" Marcus asked, noticing her distress. "What is it?" "The whispers," she admitted reluctantly. "They're getting louder." Elliot exchanged a worried glance with Marcus. "That's not a good sign. It means we're close to whatever's fueling them." Suddenly, the floor beneath their feet trembled, and a low moan echoed through the halls, sending shivers down their spines. The lights flickered, casting eerie shadows that danced along the walls. "Did you feel that?" Marcus whispered, his voice tense. Before anyone could answer, the sound of footsteps echoed ahead of them, slow, deliberate, and accompanied by the faint clinking of chains. Clara raised her flashlight, illuminating the figure of a man staggering toward them. His face was obscured by tattered bandages, and his hands were bound by rusted shackles that dragged across the floor. "Who are you?" Clara demanded, stepping forward cautiously. The man stopped, tilting his head as if listening to something only he could hear. When he spoke, his voice was hoarse and distorted, like gravel scraping against stone. "They warned me about you," he rasped, his tone dripping with menace. "You shouldn't have come here." "We're looking for the Mirror of Echoes," Clara said firmly, refusing to back down. "Do you know where it is?" The man laughed, a chilling hollow sound that sent goosebumps racing down her arms. "You think you can control it? The mirror shows truths too terrible for mortal minds to bear. It will destroy you." With that, he lunged at them, his movements unnaturally fast despite the weight of his chains. Clara barely had time to react, sidestepping just as his shackled hands swung toward her. Marcus fired a warning shot,